Palestinians as Arab. That's very intentional, because it's part of the erasure of the Palestinian identity. And I think this is even more relevant to today's events, because you see talk of like, why don't the Palestinians just go to Egypt or Lebanon, like these neighboring countries. So that language that of erasure is intended to erase the Palestinian identity and say, well, they can just go to other neighboring countries. I see a request to show the map again, so I'll show it real quick. And then I will also be showing it, referencing it again in the presentation, so you'll have a chance to see it again. So here's the map. And then we'll jump to another map. So again, I think most of you have seen this map, it represents the Palestinian loss of land. And I just want to start with a reminder of how we got here. How did we get from the picture on the left to the picture on the right? If we go all the way back to the late 1800s, which is around the same time the Zionist movement really was starting to pick up. Palestine at the time was under Ottoman rule, and this is the demographics of the population there at the time, which was about 86% Muslim, 9% Christian. And I always like to remind people, yes, there are Christian Palestinians, about 10% even to this day, and 3% Jewish, which also I like to remind people, there are Jewish Palestinians, there are Jews who were native, were native to the land, and they all lived in coexistence at the time. But at the same time, Zionism came about and wanted to establish a Jewish homeland, and in order for them to establish a Jewish homeland, they had to establish a Jewish majority. And clearly, they did not have the majority, and so what had to happen? There had to be a plan of transfer. This is not our words, this is the Zionist words. So Jabotinsky, who was a prominent Zionist leader, you see here, he says the Arabs must make room for the Jews. If it's possible to move the Baltics people, it is also possible to move the Palestinian Arabs. So here you see a recognition and an acknowledgement that there are people in the land and we got to do something with them. So Zionists themselves, dispel the myth that it was a land without a people for a people without a land. Again, here we see whites saying it is our right to transfer the Arabs. And again, notice the use of the word Arab. The Arabs must go. And so you see, a facilitation of Zionism, a facilitation of immigration, right, to start to realize this idea of creating a Jewish homeland. Obviously, after the Holocaust, the horrible events of the Holocaust, this further mobilized the Zionist movement and further pushed Jewish immigration to the land. And then, ultimately, the issue of Palestine was handed over to the UN because the British at the time, who was overseeing Palestine, or had the British mandate over Palestine, decided they can't deal with the situation right now, with the tension between the Palestinians and those who've been immigrating, and because Britain was in an awkward position because they had promised to support a Jewish homeland, but obviously the Palestinians and the neighboring Arab countries were not, for it. So they're like, here, UN, you deal with it. And the UN at that time then decided that the best solution was to split the land into two states, a Jewish state and a Palestinian or Arab state is what they called it. And they allocated 55% of the land for a minority of the population. So here right away you see injustice happening at an international level. And then the Arab or the Palestinian states was allocated 42% of the land, despite the fact that the Palestinians made up 2/3 of the population, and Jerusalem was to be under international administration. And just to be clear, no one was actually happy with this. Like the Zionists weren't happy; they wanted more land. Obviously, the Palestinians and the neighboring Arab countries weren't happy because for obvious reasons. But the partition plan passed, and for the Zionists this was enough for them, even if they weren't happy, to get a green light and start executing on this plan. And that takes us to the Nakba, which translated in Arabic is the catastrophe. And what's so hard about the events that we're going through today is because historically, when we give these presentations, we talk about the Nakba as being, the hardest event in our history. We talk about, over 750,000 Palestinians being displaced, or 500 villages ethnically cleansed in a very deliberate and systematic system. And unfortunately, the events we're seeing today have now officially surpassed the numbers of the Nakba. We have, and I'll talk about it, we have more people displaced, more people killed. It's just, it really is difficult. It's, we're living through, we always say the Nakba never ended. It's always been continuing, but, what we are seeing right now is just unprecedented. And so after the events of the Nakba, although, again, the partition plan had allocated 55% of the land for the new Israeli state, the Zionist militias acquired 78% of the land and declared themselves a state on May, I think actually officially it's May 14th, but May 15th is the day we commemorate the Nakba. And here we see the images. Again, I think many of you have seen these images before, so I'll just go through this quickly. And then if we fast forward to 1967, that takes us to the next, and really the summary here is Israel ended up taking the remaining 22% of the land that they hadn't taken in the Nakba, including parts of the Syrian Golan Heights and the Egyptian Sinai. And so now all of Palestine is under Israeli rule. So what does that mean? So that means every Palestinian is in one way, shape, or form impacted by Israeli occupation and aggression. Their experiences may vary depending on where they live, and I'll touch on that a little bit. So if you are a Palestinian living in the West Bank, you are trapped in the West Bank. You don't actually have access to leave the West Bank. All of you here as American citizens have much more rights to move. You can go to Jerusalem freely. You can go to any part, and more freely than a Palestinian living in the West Bank. Palestinians who live in occupied 48, who are citizens, live as second-class citizens. So although they have a right to vote, there are 50 laws that discriminate against them. And the government's constantly making it hard for them. You have the Palestinians who live in East Jerusalem, who are under constant pressure to move and be expelled from their homes. That's where, I'm sure you've heard of Sheikh Jarrah, Silwan. Those are the families of East Jerusalem, who, are able to travel, unlike the West Bank here, but they're not citizens. They don't even get to vote. They're residents. It's actually sadly funny, but my aunt was visiting us here in the US, and when she was showing me she lives in East Jerusalem. When she returns to her home, she's given effectively a visa. She's returning home, but they give them like indefinite visa. It's as if they're visiting their land, even though they're returning home. We have the Palestinians in Gaza, which we'll talk about. We have the refugees. You have Palestinians that are living in the diaspora like myself, right? So every Palestinian is impacted. So I'm going to show a quick video here that talks about this in more detail.
Israel maintains a single stratified population registry for everyone in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. At birth, Israel assigns each person an ID, and your ID determines your degree of freedom. According to Israel's 2018 nation-state law, only Jewish people have the right to self-determination in Israel. Over 50 Israeli laws discriminate against Palestinian citizens of Israel. For example, laws allowing for admissions committees can prevent Palestinian citizens of Israel from living in numerous small Jewish-only towns in Israel. After illegally annexing East Jerusalem in 1967, Israel assigned a residency ID to Palestinian inhabitants of the city, a precarious status that Israeli authorities can revoke at their discretion. Israeli planning documents for Jerusalem include an explicit goal of maintaining a Jewish majority in the city. Since 1967, Israel has revoked 14,500 IDs from Palestinians in East Jerusalem. An estimated 10,000 Palestinian children are unregistered due to the difficult process of obtaining a Jerusalem ID. In the West Bank, Palestinians carry a green ID. Palestinians with a green ID are only allowed to live on 40% of land in the West Bank. They face numerous barriers to movement and are barred from using certain segregated West Bank buses and roads designed to serve illegal Israeli settlements. Palestinians in Gaza are barred from living outside of Gaza, isolated from other Palestinian communities, and forced to live with the devastating effects of Israel's siege since 2007. Finally, millions of Palestinian refugees are excluded from the system altogether, since Israel denies their right of return.
And this is a little bit of an older video, so the numbers are a little bit off. So like, for example, Gaza has more than 1.6 million. They have closer to 2.3 million. But the system still stands. And I think it's really hard, especially for us as Americans, to really understand what the system means. But inshallah, I'll be going through this and what that means practically from a day-to-day. Here you have an image of a Palestinian woman holding her green ID. So what does it mean, right, to live under occupation? And typically when we talk about the occupation, it mostly impacts, what I'm going to describe is mostly impacts Palestinians living in the West Bank, but it also impacts significantly Palestinians living in East Jerusalem as well. So one of the cornerstones of occupation, maintaining military occupation, is the restriction on movement. And again, I think for many Americans, and even for for people, Palestinians who maybe have not lived in Palestine, I think this is the hardest thing to really understand, because we can see rockets, we can see killing, we can see the brutal images, but the restriction on movement is not something that you can really understand until you've lived it yourself, because it's such a slow, suffocating death effectively that Israel imposes on Palestinians. And Israel has an entire system on how they restrict it. They restrict movement through the use of checkpoints, roadblocks, the separation wall, the traveling permits, the IDs. And one of them obviously is the checkpoints. And I always show this video.
ساعة العمل الشاق ما بيهلك البني آدم قد بس عملية المرور من هذا المعبر.
And I want to emphasize that last statement that the video had. Imagine this was your daily life. This is literally their daily life. Like, I'm not talking about like crossing state lines. You're going to visit another state. This is literally if you're going to go from Minneapolis to St. Paul. Palestinians have to, most Palestinians have to go through a checkpoint or multiple checkpoints. When I lived there, I had to go through 3 checkpoints to get to school. These checkpoints are just an absolute nightmare. They are a place of humiliation and dehumanization. This is a checkpoint at 3 a.m. in the morning. Why are people at 3 a.m. in the morning? Israel depends on Palestinians for cheap labor. So all of these are workers that get work permits that allow them to cross from West Bank into Jerusalem, but they have to be at the checkpoint at 3 a.m. so that they have enough time to spend 3-4 hours at a checkpoint to get through so that they can make it to their job on time and not be fired. And then they have to come back in the evening or afternoon. The Palestinians there are treated like animals. I will not forget when I would go through a checkpoint. You have to go, it's like, imagine going through airport security every day, multiple times a day. Like, if you have a belt, you have to take it off. You have your backpack, you have to put it on. You have coins in your pocket. You have to, it's unbelievable. You have to go through that. And you can imagine how that cripples a society when your movement is restricted. And I remember, like, you would go up and show your ID, and the person on the other side could, like, literally was reading a book, and it wasn't until he decided he was ready to look up and check my ID that he then decided to let me through. And this is just one small example. There's times where they'll be multiple lines at a checkpoint, and they'll decide, okay, we're closing down this line, and then everybody has to move to the next line. There's times where they just close the checkpoint. You're just out of luck. So it's meant to dehumanize and humiliate and make it difficult for people to move about their day. There's also the apartheid wall. So this wall separates that Israel built around the West Bank. They claim it's for safety reasons, but it's really, again, another way of restricting movement and crippling Palestinian society. It's 400 miles in length, 25 feet high. It's about double the size of the Berlin Wall, 4 times as long, and it's illegal under international court. And again, they built it around the West Bank, so that red line is where the wall is built, and they actually built it inside the land. So even with building the wall, they even acquired even more land. This is my village, my town. So my family lives on this side of the wall, and they own and operate this business on the other side of the wall. So it was a straight drive into work, and then the wall went up, right? And so now they have to go through go around, go through a checkpoint. Hopefully checkpoint's open, get checked, and get in. And my family is lucky. We have blue IDs. My family, I don't, but my aunts and uncles, they have blue IDs. So at least they can actually get through the checkpoint. If they had green IDs, they wouldn't even be allowed, right? They're stuck inside the wall. And I like to remind people, 26 feet high, like, you can say 25 feet high, you can say it as a number, but it's not really until you see it for yourself, you realize how tall that is. It's huge. Like this is me, and that's the wall. It's just huge, massive concrete barrier that's in your face that cuts through Palestinian land. You know, people were neighbors one day and woke up the next day and there's concrete barrier between them and their neighbor. For some people, it literally cut through their land, so they couldn't even access the, you know, all of their land. The West Bank also has segregated roads, so roads that only Jews can use, or you know, Israeli settlers can use. You know, and even for Palestinians living in the West Bank, they can't even leave the West Bank, obviously. So everything outside of the West Bank is inaccessible to them. This is a representation of the settlements on the West Bank. So settlements are have eaten up at this point over 40% of the West Bank, and they hold over 750,000 settlers. And this is a new fact that I recently learned. 60,000 of those settlers are American settlers. These are American citizens that lived here and moved there, and they were, many of them paid and told, here, you have a house, right? Like, here, live on Palestinian land. And these are illegal. All settlements, all settlers are illegal under international law, because Palestine, under international law, the West Bank is an occupied territory. And Israel, as the occupying force, is not allowed to transfer its own population into the land it occupies. So all of this is illegal. Even by US policy, they're not allowed. And yet the US hasn't done anything to really stop them. And they've continued to expand, despite, you know, even when people bring up the two-state solution or all of Oslo and all of that, like, it's all a facade, because Israel has not stopped building settlements. They just continue to expand. They just continue to eat up more Palestinian land. And it's not just the settlement itself, right? It's the infrastructure that has to connect the settlements, because they want these settlers to be able to visit these settlers, right? And so that's how you have roads now that eat up more Palestinian land. That's how you have Jewish-only roads. And, you know, settlers that live on this dot, on this blue dot, are considered Israeli citizens. They have a right to vote. They are treated as citizens. But the Palestinian who literally lives right outside the settlement is not a citizen. They don't have no right to vote. Not only that, but obviously they're subjected to a military occupation. If an Israeli settler commits a crime, they're treated as a civilian. If a Palestinian commits a crime, they're treated in a military court. So it's a very clear system of apartheid that differentiates between people based on their ethnic or religious background. And these settlements are not like, you know, tents, right? Like, they're like full-blown cities. So this is an example of a settlement. All of this is built on Palestinian land. You know, Palestinians had to be driven away from here. Trees had to be uprooted to build this settlement. And like I said, everybody lives here. Settlements here they're Israeli citizens. Palestinians right outside are not. Palestinians, unless they maybe are being used for cheap labor, Palestinians aren't even allowed into the settlement. Settler violence is a huge issue for Palestinians living in the West Bank. So many Palestinians have to deal with the violence of these settlers who are armed to the teeth. And this is not an exaggeration. This is a common sight. Like, these are, you know, quote unquote civilians, but they walk around like this is how they walk around. This is how they go to work. This is how they go to the grocery store. You know, so everybody is armed. And not only that, but the Israeli government actually gives them these arms. You know, this is a picture of Israeli settlers who are attacking a Palestinian man on his land who's trying to pick olives. This is a quote unquote civilian. You know, he's dressed in civilian clothes. He has a weapon, and I'm not going to play the video, but he ultimately shoots this Palestinian man point blank in his chest. And if you could see in the video, there's an Israeli settler. He's not shown in this frame. An Israeli soldier. So, you know, soldier who's technically, you know, supposed to maintain order, some level of law, is just watching the Israeli settler assault this Palestinian man who's on his own land. And so Palestinians are constantly under the threat and the violence of the Israeli settlers, who feel really entitled because they're protected by the Israeli government. They're not held accountable. They're not punished for attacking Palestinians. And they do this because, again, they have a sense of entitlement. Like, we were brought onto this land and we're going to make your life hell and miserable so we can try to drive you away from your home. This Palestinian farmer was actually killed by an Israeli settler in the recent wave of events on his land. And here's a picture of an Israeli official going to the West Bank to hand out assault rifles to they call them civilian security squads. Another really, you know, difficult thing that Palestinians, especially in the West Bank, have to deal with is the military detention. So Israel uses this as a weapon against Palestinians, taking in Palestinians as prisoners. There's over 7,000 Palestinians now in prisons. Now, these numbers may have shifted a little bit with the recent hostage swap, but that being said, Israel has already, if you don't know, during the humanitarian pause, as they called it, Israel released 150 Palestinians, and in that same time that they released 150, they arrested more than the 150. So just putting that into perspective, some people are being rearrested. 1,300 of those Palestinians are held in administrative detention, which is a practice that Israel uses to hold Palestinians with no charge or trial for 6 months, and then indefinitely keeps renewing their 6 months. So that's 1,300. So when people talk about Israeli hostages, it's important to mention that Israel has been holding Palestinian hostages, for years and decades, not charging them, or for those who have been charged, they're like either they are forced into a confession, or they're small crimes like throwing rocks for kids. Just since October 7th, Israel has arrested 3,000 Palestinians in the West Bank. 4 out of 10 Palestinian men will spend time in Israeli jail. And again, Palestinians are trialed in military court, which has a conviction rate of like 99%. I'll play this video real quick.
صوت خبط باقي طلعت الجندي الصحفي بكل قم يا حبيبي تعال
كان في الواجهة بعديها تتفرج ما قلت إلا بطلع لي الدكاترة أول شيء عالج الكل بعطينا الأمير عشان يكون يزكي في الشيء. نتمنى ولا شيء مستعمرا قرأت على كنت الشاشة بس كان كذا.
بلشت سياسة الضرب يعني في السيارة يخبط فيا يعني لدرجة إنه وجع.
بلش من شلت الوعي بلش مات شوية وقال أنا مش طلعت على البوصلة بعد البوصلة مش جاية ولازم تقريبا 4 ساعات في البوصلة و4 ساعات كملت صرت ثلج هذا. قعدنا هنا بعدين صار يضرب عليه حجار وكان رايح جاي يضرب بعد يمكن 5 ساعات جينا وطلعنا على السجون.
بلش يحاربوا معي يقولوا لي تعال رافج ليش تضربك؟ اعترف شيء بسيط ضربك يعني.
يقول لي اعترف انك بتضرب عشان غلط قلت له مش علي شيء عشان أول ما اعترفت طلعت طويل بسيط يقول ضربني عليه اعترفت الحاجة
يعني عملوا أنا يعني شو صعب هذا البني آدم فاضطر إنه يصير يضربني مسكني من راسي وخبط راسي في الطاولة ضربني هنا وش عمرني.
استخدم ضغط النفسي اشتري شيء بعد كده باخذ اخوه بجيب اهلك هيك قدام بسوي اي شيء. الفلسطيني طبعا كل اخوه وزي القاهره كل شيء يتعلق بالتعليم كل ذي القاهره. يعني الشروط بالنسبه للشروط شروط مساوي يعني مميزين يعني حتى بدك تحس بنهارهم قدامك مش قادر تعمل لهم شيء. ايوه
This is a reality that Palestinian children were facing even well before October 7th. Again, Israel detains and prosecutes 700 children a year. And they face night arrest, and they usually come in at night. I mean, it's just a system of instilling terror and violence against these kids and their families. 2023 was the deadliest year on record for Palestinian children, even before October 7th. This is really important. This is really important for people to understand. Even before October 7th, Israel was on track, or what had exceeded how many kids it had ever killed, Palestinian kids, and most of these were in the West Bank, than any year on record. I mean, the previous record was set in 2022. So I see questions about two-state solution. Like we're getting further and further away, right? Like Israel just continues to inflict more violence, more aggression, steal more land. So all of this is the reality. So before October 7th, Israel had killed 40 children just this year. And since October 7th, 68 children in the West Bank have been killed, amongst the 273, just in general, Palestinians that have been killed in the West Bank. This is Mohammed al-Tamimi. He was 2 years old, and he was sitting in a car with his father, and he was shot and killed in June 2023, again, before October 7th. Maher, he's one of those who had been killed just, I believe this was yesterday, or today, actually. I just pulled this. So he's been killed in the recent events. And I'm going to read this. Israeli snipers in Al-Farah refugee camp in the occupied West Bank shot Maher Abdullah Ahmed Jawabra, 14, in the head today, killing him. Maher bled for an hour as Israeli forces prevented paramedics from reaching him. Like, it's just aggression on aggression and aggression. I mean, the fact this kid is a refugee, or he's a child of refugees. He already lives in a refugee camp, which in of itself is a difficult experience. The fact that he's shot in the head, like, why is the sniper in the West Bank, first of all, and why is he shooting kids in the head? And then he bled for an hour before Israel. It's just, I mean, this is the reality. And I tell people, like, imagine if this is what is your life. These are your kids, right? Like, how would you feel? How would you feel about Israel? How would you feel about, what the solution would be? This is the reality. And he's, again, one of many. I wish I could tell every kid's story, every Palestinian story, but, this is a reality. So just to summarize, the West Bank's been under a brutal military occupation, which includes the restriction on movement, the arrests and the military detention. The raids on refugee camps have not stopped. They've always been ongoing before October 7th. The Israeli settler attacks we talked about, the killing of civilians, including children. So all of this has existed for the last, for decades. And it's only just that since October 7th, that all of these events have escalated to new levels. I'm just going to click the chat real quick, see if there's any questions. Okay. Yeah, some of these questions I'll address at the end, or as we get closer to the more relevant. So now I want to jump into Gaza. Again, I think many of you, if you've been following or have some awareness about the situation, Gaza was already a difficult place before October 7th. It's been under blockade since 2007, 97% of the water unfit for drinking, 50% unemployment rate, which is one of the highest in the world. Electricity is constantly cut off, and Gaza had experienced 4 major military assaults. People cite October 7th and how many Israelis were killed. Israel killed that many Palestinians in just one assault on Gaza in 2014. And the UN indicated that the Gaza would be unlivable by 2020. So obviously we were past 2020. So it was already a humanitarian disaster. And I won't play this video, but just the summary really of this is, if you are a child born in 2007, at this point you've lived through 5 wars. Psychologists have come out and said there's no post-traumatic stress in Gaza because the war never ends. There's no post. They're just in a constant, they're constantly living this aggression. I'm going to play this video. So after, obviously, the events of October 7th, Israel obviously has come out in full force against the people of Gaza. And I think it's important to pay attention to the language that Israeli officials have been using. So I'm going to play this video.
זכור את אשר עשה לך עמלק, נצטווינו. אנו זוכרים ואנו נלחמים.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true.
אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם, ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
Very puzzled by the constant concern which the world is showing for the Palestinian people and is actually showing for these horrible, inhuman animals who have done the worst atrocities that this century has seen.
אז לא תחזור להיות משהו. חמאס לא יהיה. חסל את הכל.
مع هيك وحوش بشرية رايحين نتعامل كيف لازم. إسرائيل فرضت إغلاق كامل على غزة.
هناك إسرائيليون يعني وصفوا الفلسطينيين في غزة وصفوهم بأنهم حيوانات والأقل من حيوانات.
أنا لا أسويهم بالحيوانات لأن هذا تحقير للحيوانات.
هذا رأيك دكتور مردخاي؟
هذا رأيي.
تكسفوا אותם כמה שיותר, שלא להשאיר מהם זכר. שלא הם, לא אמא שלהם, לא הילדה שלהם, לא התינוקות שלהם, אסור להם לחיות לחיות האלה. יש לך שכן ערבי, אתה לא תחכה שהוא יבוא אליך הביתה, תיכנס אליו הביתה ותירה.
תראה, לצורך אתה חושב שאנחנו יכולים להרוג מאות אלפי פלסטינים ברצועת עזה, והדבר הזה יעבור? תראה, עכשיו בתקשורת הזרה יוצאת הודעה בשם ישראל שמיליון פלסטינים כבר ירדו מדרום הרצועה דרומה, וכל מי שנשאר שם נחשב כמחבל.
תגיד את עזה עכשיו, עכשיו. עזה הופכת לדרזדן, כן. הארץ שלנו.
So, I hope you were paying attention to who these people are talking. Like, there's not some like fringe people or random, fringe extremists. Like, these are Israeli officials verbalizing Israel's goals for the people of Gaza, Palestinians in general, and the land. Right? You see levels of dehumanization, asserting that Palestinians are animals or even less than animals. And this was never about Hamas. Hamas is used as an excuse, but really ultimately Israel's goal is to drive Palestinians out of their land and take over Gaza. And it's very clear, and I'll show some pictures. It's a continuation of the ethnic cleansing. It's a continuation of the settler colonial project. As of now, and I have to constantly update these numbers, it's actually becoming harder to update these numbers because Israel has destroyed the infrastructure in Gaza, especially in the medical sector. It's becoming harder for them to even track. So we expect that these numbers are actually higher. But the latest that we can get in is over 16,000 Palestinians have been killed in the last 2 months, nearly 8,000 children, and another 8,000 missing under the rubble, who are obviously will be expected, probably killed at this point. And so, we see these images of just sheer devastation. Absolutely. I mean, Israel is completely destroying Gaza's infrastructure, homes, hospitals, and obviously they're killing. Some very difficult images. I don't think this is an image we can ever take out of our mind. This is a press conference happening in a hospital with bodies around the podium because Gazans were trying to just get somewhat, the world's attention to what Israel is doing. And these images, I showed you the images of the Nakba, earlier in the presentation, and it's horrific for us to literally be watching another Nakba. I mean, these are such stark, like comparing this to the Nakba images. And I want to emphasize a couple of things here. Gaza, Israel claims that it gave people a chance to go from the north to the south, and that the south is safer. Number one, the act of just because you told someone or give them a warning to leave their home does not make it right. Like, imagine if someone came to your house and like, I'm warning you, you have a day to leave your house. Like, that still is ethnic cleansing. That is still a crime. So just because Israel claims like we gave people a chance to leave, that does not justify their action. Number one. Number two, what they call the humanitarian corridor is not actually a humanitarian. There's been many cases of documented of Palestinians being killed in that so-called humanitarian corridor that Israel established for Palestinians to move from the north to the south. They were killed either with the rockets, or they were snipers that killed them, even though they were civilians, had their hands raised, carrying white flags. That's number two. The last point is the south is not safer, actually. So we know Israel has been bombing the south since the beginning, and now they're intensifying. Now they're claiming that Hamas is in the south. Again, all of these are just lies that they use to justify their actions. And ultimately, the ultimate goal is really to completely ethnically cleanse the Palestinian people, completely drive them out of Gaza. You might have seen the image on the left. This is one of the most iconic images from Deir Yassin massacre, during the events of the Nakba. And on the right, this is an image. I hope you all, I'm not going to share the video, but I hope you all have seen this story. I mean, this is a grandfather holding his grandchild, and it went viral because it's just he just is so heartbroken, and he calls her the soul of my soul, and talks. He can't believe she's been killed. This was an image that got shared widely in the beginning of the events, showing the level of destruction. The journalist who took the picture, Rushdie, was killed by Israel a few days later after this image was shared so widely. And at this point, it's been established that Israel is intentionally targeting journalists. Over 60 journalists have been killed by Israel just since October 7th. And we know that they're intentionally target them because they literally will call up the journalists and tell them, you need to evacuate, or we know where you are. And not only are they killing journalists, but they're targeting their families as well. This is Wael al-Dahdouh, a very prominent journalist in the Arab world. He's with Al Jazeera. He's been based out of Gaza and has been covering Gaza for many, many years. Israel killed his wife, his two kids, and a grandchild. Hundreds of Palestinian families have been wiped off the civil registry. For me, this was one of the hardest things to grasp. Like, what does that even mean? That means that Israel killed everybody alive from the family. They killed the grandparents, the parents, the children. There is no one left of the family to bury the dead. There's no one to give your condolences to. This is just one example of one family on the right. That is 44 members killed in one attack, ranging from ages, I believe, 40 days to 80 years. You can see the images of just mass killing. And unfortunately, it's not the first time. We've seen this. We've seen this in 2008. We've seen this in 2012. We've seen this in 2014. But again, the levels that for this assault have just been unprecedented. This is a family. Everybody in this family was killed. And again, this is one example of one family. But I share this family is because they're a family of a family friend here in Minnesota, Sister Manal. She lives here, and her entire family, she lost over 30 members of her family, including all her brothers, her siblings, their spouses, their kids. The only person who survived was her mother and one nephew. This is Yusuf. And, again, I wish I could share every story, but I can't. But I do want to remind everyone that, Palestinians are not just numbers. They have stories. They are people. This is Yusuf. He is also his aunt also lives here in Minnesota, so he's her nephew. He's 7 years old. The video of his mom looking for him also went viral because she went to the hospital saying, has anyone seen Yusuf? His skin is fair and his hair is curly. And then I'm going to share a video here.
هذا هو المفروض عليه. وين؟
هذا انا حملته مش مشكله.
أنا رأيي كثير.
That video is always so hard to watch. Especially like I said, because his aunt, that doctor, his sister lives here in Minnesota. And just again, put yourself in his shoes. You're at work and you get, notified that your son might have been killed, and then you have to go identify his body. And then, until that moment, you're just hoping that it's not him, that they have the wrong person. And unfortunately, his worst fear was confirmed. And that family lost 5 people in the attack. So Yusuf and his aunt and 3 of his cousins as well were killed. Ras Siegel, he's an Israeli historian and a professor of Holocaust and genocide studies, has come out and said this is a textbook case of genocide. They say, one of the hardest things to prove genocide in like the formal sense is to prove genocidal intent. And yet in this case, Israel has been so clear, right? Like we just saw the video. Israeli officials have been very explicit about what they're trying to do in Gaza. One of the things that has made this Israeli assault on Gaza particularly more difficult and just unbelievable is the intentional targeting of the medical sector. Israel has attacked multiple hospitals. Over 200 healthcare workers have been killed. I mean, we just saw images. I mean, it felt so surreal and dystopian when we were watching this on the news. Like, this is literally a tank outside of a hospital, right? And then there were images of the Israeli soldiers literally taking over a hospital. Like, and even prior to that, Al-Shifa, people who worked at Al-Shifa hospital were saying we're getting calls from Israel asking us to evacuate. Like, what world do we live in where an army, a military can call a hospital and tell them to evacuate, right? Like, that's just completely unacceptable, let alone to actually go in and attack the hospital and kill people and arrest. Like, to this day, the head of Al-Shifa hospital has been arrested along with 22 other members of the hospital, and we don't know where they are. We don't know what Israel is doing with them. And just this morning, there was another attack on a hospital, Yemen al-Said. So it's just been massive targeting and intentional targeting of the healthcare system to really, again, cripple the Gaza society and the Gaza infrastructure to make it harder for them to recover from this. Early on, we saw the Israeli attack on Al-Ahli hospital, which killed 500 people. We see the targeting of ambulances. This is a nurse who got news of his family being killed while he was working. And like I said, over 200 healthcare workers have been killed. Again, just to humanize who these people are, Dr. Hammam actually did an interview recently with, I think it was Democracy Now! And she asked him, why don't you evacuate? He was in the north. He's like, she asked him, why don't you evacuate? Israel just said you need to evacuate. He said, do you think this is the reason I went to med school? To think only about my life and not my patients. So he refused to leave the north, and Israel ended up killing him and his family on November 12th. And I'm going to share this video real quick.
They are now lying on the floor in the cardiac units, and they are covered with some blankets in order to avoid hypothermia. These babies should have been, they should have been in the incubators, of course, and they are surrounded by Israeli armed forces who are shooting at the hospital. We learned this morning, snipers were shooting through the windows and into the staff. We also learned that one nurse was killed in the neonatal ICU.
Honestly, today when I spoke with the Red Cross, literally they told me that they have suspended their operations in Gaza and they have no news about Mira and the house. No news at all. I don't know whether they are all right or not. honestly, this is something you cannot describe when you reach to such a point where you can't provide safety to your newborn children.
The staff of the Shifa Hospital requested that we will help the babies in the pediatric department to get to a safer hospital. כוחות צה"ל השלימו את כיתור העיר עזה. הם פועלים בלב העיר. הם בפאתי בית החולים שיפה. הם חיסלו אלפי מחבלים, כולל מפקדים בכירים ורבי מרצחים, שהיו בין אלה שהובילו את הטבח הנורא הזה באותה שבת ארורה של ה-7 באוקטובר.
I'm sick and tired of these claims that there is a Hamas command center. We, as I've said 100 times, we have never seen it. We have never seen any high-ranking Hamas people in Shifa. I'm very careful that there is an ongoing massacre which will not be covered and we will not be able to see it. But in Al-Shifa, desperate situation, no oxygen, no food, no water, and of course, absolutely no security for patients and staff. Is this a genocide in slow motion? The answer is yes. This has been going on for 4 weeks now. People are dying hour by hour. People are starving. People are thirsting in 2023. When is this going to stop?
Unfortunately, it's been another 4 weeks since that video, and it hasn't stopped. And rather, we're seeing even more and more difficult images come up. This was surfaced a few days ago. Israel itself actually had published these images claiming that they had captured all Hamas members who had surrendered. And that's just an absolute lie, right? Like, you know, given how Hamas is, right, and what they have been doing, it doesn't make sense that militants would surrender en masse, right? It's very clear that these are civilians. And in fact, Palestinian families were able to identify their family members from these pictures. And some of them are journalists, some of them are UN staff. And, you know, what further proves that this was a lie is that, you know, Israel took these men, arrested them, took them to the edge, and then at some point released some of them and allowed them to walk home, you know, naked and barefoot. And so if they were actually Hamas members, if they were actually militants, would Israel have let them go? No. And Israel does still have some men with them, and their families have no idea what's going to happen to them. And, you know, I saw this tweet by Ian Bremmer, who came out, he says, you know, I don't know if he's being sarcastic, I don't know what he said, but unclear what Israel is trying to accomplish planting flags in Gaza. You know, and you know, my answer to that is it's very clear what it's trying to do, right? Again, it's a settler colonial project. It's a continuation of the ethnic cleansing and the theft of land. That is what it's doing. It's not about eliminating Hamas, and Israel has not even been able to explain what that means and how they would even declare victory to that. And it's just about driving people out of their homes and claiming it for Israel. And we've seen, again, clear images of them planting Israeli flags and you know, claiming them as land that they had acquired. And then I'm going to wrap up here quickly. So I just one thing to emphasize about the media. This is really important, especially I think for us as Americans, is to be wary of what's being covered in the media or how it's being talked about, right? Early on when these events happened, there was a claim made that 40 babies were murdered by Hamas and they were beheaded. I mean, just horrible, horrible things. And this was widely spread, like every major news network had covered it, New York Post, CNN. President Biden himself said that he had seen the images of these beheaded children. And yet, the Israeli official came out and said that they were not, you know, this was a few weeks later, they said, you know, we actually can't confirm that this happened. The White House itself walked back Biden's statement after he said he saw the images. I mean, it's just blatant lying. And the journalist who first broke the story for CNN also came out and said, I actually never confirmed the story. And this is just one example of many, many claims we've seen. And, you know, at that point, this thing goes and, you know, and this came out early on. So it really was used as a way to, you know, justify the action that Israel was taking against the Palestinians. I mean, this lie led to the killing and the justification of the killing of Palestinians and Palestinian children. Language matters again. You know, we see here in this BBC article, more than 500 people have died in Gaza, whereas more than 700 people have been killed in Israel, right? So why do Palestinians die and why do Israelis get killed, right? So that use of passive language is a way of dehumanizing Palestinians. And this to me is the second most ridiculous. I'll show you the most ridiculous thing I've seen, but this is the second more. Literally in the same sentence, they refer to Israeli hostages as children, whereas Palestinian prisoners, they call them as people aged 18 and under. Like, what? What does that even mean, right? Why are they referred to as people aged 18? And notice they also refer to Israelis as hostages, but Palestinians as prisoners. Even the use of the word prisoner implies that, you know, they were taken into prison, that there's like an actual system of justice, whereas, you know, that. So you see this level of dehumanization, this double standard. And I think this is the worst one I've seen, is 4 fragile lives found ended. It doesn't even sound like proper English. What does that mean? 4 fragile lives found ended. This is referring to a story of a hospital where Israel forced the staff out of the hospital and promised that they would handle the kids that were there. What the Palestinians found out a few weeks later when they were able to return to the hospital was that Israel never helped evacuate those babies, and their bodies were found decomposing in the hospital. And this is how the Washington Post chose to frame it. 4 fragile lives ended. Very passive, very unclear. One fact is that Israel would not be able to do what it's doing without the US. This is an absolute fact. Israel is the biggest recipient of foreign military aid. We give them $3.8 billion a year, and there's efforts right now to send additional military funding for them to support them in this quote unquote war, and obviously the political support. So the US has always been a blocker to being able to hold Israel accountable in the UN. Just yesterday, they voted against the ceasefire. And because the US is the only one that voted against the ceasefire, I mean, at this point, most people now want a ceasefire, and still the US votes against it. And we see also the crackdown on BDS efforts. Over 30 states have laws criminalizing anyone who engages in boycotting of Israeli products. Here's the shameful image of the US voting against a ceasefire. BDS, I won't go into it. I'm going to assume most of you here know it, but I think it's an important tool, boycotting Israeli products, divesting from companies profiting off of the occupation, and holding Israel accountable at an international level through sanctions. And so so it's important to engage in BDS, and this could be its own separate presentation. And I'll share this presentation so folks can, see the link and go to the website. But important to engage in BDS. And just some more practical action items. I'll just end. Education is really important. There's always new things happening. Even for myself as a Palestinian who lives this and watches it every day, there's always something I need to learn about and what's happening. Organizing a talk. So, this is, again, I appreciate Middle East Peace Now. I think for me personally, I think this is one of the most effective things that we can do, attending protests, BDS, and challenging the mainstream narrative, because a lot of Americans especially are not only uninformed, but misinformed about what's happening, because there's such a strong mischaracterization of the situation. And I think this is the last thing. I'm just going to end with this video because Dr. Rifat has been such a strong voice. He's a poet and a professor of English literature in Gaza. He's been such a force during these last events in terms of raising awareness and sharing daily updates on what's happening there. And Israel just killed him. And it's been such a shock for me personally. So I'll share this video that shares his story.
We know that it's very bleak, it's very dark. There's no way out. If there's no water, there's no way out of Gaza. What should we do? Like drown? Like commit mass suicide? Is this what Israel wants? And we're not going to do that. And I was telling some friend the other day that I am an academic. I Probably the toughest thing I have at home is an expo marker. But if the Israelis invade, if they target us, charge at us, open door to door, to massacre us, I'm going to use that marker, throw it at the Israeli soldiers, even if that is the last thing that I would be able to do. And this is the feeling of everybody. We are helpless. We have nothing to lose.
The one assuring thing that there has been mass support for Palestine, and I think mass outrage, although the governments have not been reflective of the public opinion, but we do see protests happening everywhere. And again, I do want to recognize that Jewish anti-Zionists have been coming out in full force, especially here in the US, and saying, not in our name, and demanding ceasefire. This is them in Grand Central Station. Thousands, they got, I believe they ended up getting arrested. They also did an action at the US Capitol, Lady Liberty. We've had protests here in Minnesota. This is Minneapolis, St. Paul. London's been bringing out about like 1 million people a week. This is Washington, D.C. And so, I always like to end presentations on a positive note, because I think Palestinians are generally, as difficult as it is, we say Gaza teaches life. Palestinians teach life. We teach what it means to love life and love liberation, and to fight for what you believe in, and to fight for your values. And so these are the smiles of the kids that, give us hope. This is a Palestinian kid who was pulled out from the rubble, and there's a video of him that was really sad. He was shaking and just looked like he was just in absolute shock after his house had been bombed. And a few days later, there was this picture of him that surfaced of him smiling. And this is what we want to get to, where every Palestinian child can smile. This is a Palestinian girl in a refugee camp, and still, despite the challenges, she's smiling. And I want to end with just honoring our medical staff, especially the people in Gaza who've just been working day in and day out, despite the challenges, despite not having resources, despite not having the medical supplies, and working in such difficult, dangerous conditions, and still being able to say, hey, we're here, we're still alive, we're still fighting. And I think for us, that encourages us to keep doing the work that we're doing. So I'll stop here, and maybe we can open it up for questions.
Mariam, first I want to, on behalf of, I'm sure everyone watching and listening, offer our condolences for your personal losses.
Thank you.
There's not much to say, other than shame.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me saying, whether we like it or not, I'm a Palestinian, right? But I feel ashamed, right? I live in this country. I pay taxes. I voted for some of these elected officials that refuse to even sign on to a ceasefire. So this is as much of an American issue as anything. We're not trying to get people's sympathy for some, every life matters, obviously, and we should care about that. But we as Americans, we are implicated in this, whether we like it or not. And so we really have to fight for this, to end this madness, to end, this injustice and complete disregard for life, and really, and I think this is, to channel this into, in productive action, really make the elected officials pay for their actions. This is where we need to organize. We need to hold people accountable. It's just unbelievable. We've been calling our elected officials every day, and I have days when I can't pick up the phone because I feel like I can't sit there and call an office and try to get them to beg for their, we're not begging anyone, right, to see us as humans, but we will hold them accountable, and we have to hold them accountable. And again, I just want to emphasize that it is a responsibility, whether we like it or not, by virtue of us living here and being citizens here. We are funding this genocide.
I completely agree. And before we get to the questions, I want to add to that. I most likely share what most people watching this are feeling, is we are in an absolute quandary right now with an upcoming election, because of who's on the other side and who might get elected if we do not vote for Biden. And I don't know the answer to that. I truly don't. There is no good answer. So I'll leave it at that and go to the Q&A. We have several excellent questions. Some of them you have already answered. For Minnesotans, the perspective of MEPN Mariam El-Khatib weighing into our electeds has yet to be a mass opportunity to exert pressure. Every day it only gets worse. Looking forward to figuring out how we in Minnesota may lift up our voices in a meaningful, effective, and hopeful manner. You kind of reiterated that, or you iterated this, certainly pointing to us, Middle East Peace Now, to further educate. The education part is extremely difficult. There's incredible pushback there. My own church is going to be about to host someone, and we're getting major pushback. So
and this is why I emphasize education. I'm glad you brought that up. This is why I emphasize, because there's an active effort to silence. I was set to present at a school, my sister's school, after I had reached out expressing concern, like saying, hey, I just want to make sure, the environment that she's in as a Palestinian Muslim student, like the staff, administration knows how to talk about this and handle this situation, and I'm here to help navigate. And I was invited by the school to come talk. And then 1 hour before, I was called into a meeting with the principal, and ultimately the talk was canceled. This is a middle school, right? Like, I mean, that's how like these systems are embedded into our society, where that they're threatened even at a middle school level, that there's someone's going to talk about Palestine. And I kid you not, I'm not even exaggerating. The principal's explanation was, I didn't know this was going to be an educational presentation. I thought it was just, we were going to talk about how to support Palestinian students. And I told him, what do you mean by that? Like, we're going to talk about feelings? Like, So education is really important. And we want to emphasize, I'm glad to hear, you're hosting in your church, because you all probably have access to, I'm a Palestinian, right? So people will be like, okay, well, she's Palestinian. Obviously she comes with a certain perspective. But if you will have access, to spaces that maybe Palestinians have access, or, I'll just say, coming from a white person explaining it, like from your fellow church person, they might be more receptive to that. So if you're able to help propagate this message, I think that's really, really important. And we're always happy to support wherever we can, in terms of doing the presentations and coming in and speaking.
Absolutely, Mariam. This is a question that came in via email prior to today. Please ask Mariam if she would speak about the targeting of Palestinian women and children specifically. I listed to these below, and she did in the email. Other explicitly stated that women, Kevin and others explicitly stated that women and children are being targeted by Israel because it is they that bear the children who will be the future power against Israel.
The answer to that is Israel is targeting everyone, right? Like everybody's a target, and they, by their own statements, right? Like they said, no innocents in Gaza, and there are no civilians in Gaza. So I think the targeting is I mean, it's this indiscriminate bombing, right? And if we are to talk about children and women, they make up, I believe, around 80% of those killed are children and women. So absolutely, I mean, they're targeting everybody and anybody. They're targeting our teachers and our doctors and engineers and kids and elderly. So everybody is a target in Israel's eyes.
Thank you. Marianne says, I stand with Palestinians, help those of us who do answer the question we get. How should Israel have reacted to October 7th? Good question.
I can't tell Israel how to react. I think their reaction makes sense for who they are and what they stand for, right? And I think well-intentioned people always say, what did Palestinians think after October 7th was going to happen? The Palestinians know that. Palestinians knew as soon as October 7th that Israel was going to unravel its wrath on them, right? Like, this is not new. What Israel's doing to Palestinians is not new. I think the question is not what should Israel have done, but what the world should do to Israel, right? And what the US should do to Israel is hold them accountable, right? And so, from Israel's perspective, of course, that's how they're going to respond, because Israel sees Palestinians as, their existence is a blocker to their ability to acquire all of Palestine and Palestinian land, right? So I think the question is more, how should the US, how should the world community, and the answer to that is hold Israel accountable for its crimes, not just on October 7th, but the occupation, the military occupation, the expansion of settlements, the military detention of Palestinian children. So we as a society need to hold Israel more accountable, so that events like October 7th don't happen, so that Palestinians can live in freedom and justice and liberation, and events like October 7th won't happen. Palestinians live in a concentration camp. Like, what was Israel, what does the world expect to happen, right? Like, you squeeze the people long enough, something's gonna break. And so while the events are unfortunate, but you know, it's what else do Palestinians have to do, right, to gain the world's attention, and force them to hold Israel accountable? And unfortunately, we see even despite that, like, I mean, Israel has committed 100 October 7th at this point, and yet they're still not being held accountable. So I think it just further put, like, from a Palestinian perspective, it further says like look, like Israel just does everything that they get to do and no one holds them accountable. So don't tell us about October 7th if you're not ready to talk about October 8th and October 9th and October 10th and October 11th. And actually, maybe we should start in 1948.
And before then, yes.
Yeah, right. Like, yeah, you know, you want to talk about October 7th, let's start in 1948, right? And ask them about every day since then.
Yeah. And to that I will add money. Money talks. And we continue to give aid no matter what.
100%. 100%. And that's why BDS and movement like boycotts and financial pressure. Israel is not gonna, you know, what's I always forget the famous quote, like, your oppressor is never gonna hand you your freedom, right? So Israel, I don't expect Israel to grant liberation to Palestinians. It's just not, it's just not in their interest, right? And so we just have to pressure them.
Actually, that segues to the next question. Do you have hope for a two-state solution? I think I know the answer, but
absolutely not. I think for many reasons. I mean, just let's talk about a practical, okay, where are you going to draw the boundaries of two-state? Who gets Jerusalem, right? Like, Palestinians are not going to say, yes, Israel, you can have Jerusalem, right? Masjid al-Aqsa. Israel isn't going to. That's one thing. And then the other is just the reality of the ground. Like I said, Israel has not stopped expanding settlements. It's just, this two-state solution is a facade. It's a way to silence and really actually what's the word? Like, not actually address the issue. It's like, oh yeah, two-state solution, but it's not actually holding Israel accountable for its crimes and actions.
I would call it an opiate.
Yeah, that's a good way of framing it.
It just kind of lulls people into thinking, as long as we're working toward a two-state solution.
And by the way, Israel has never officially like defined its borders. There's cases of Israeli officials sharing maps that not only include like all of historic Palestine, but parts of neighboring Arab countries. So where is Israel going to stop, right?
I don't think we have any more questions. We have several comments about, here's one, excuse me. Please talk about Hamas. Do Palestinians decry Hamas?
Sure. So I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about armed resistance in general, and armed resistance. By the way, armed resistance is a right of the Palestinian people as an occupied people. That's a right enshrined in international law. And you will be hard pressed to find a Palestinian who does not believe in the Palestinian right to resist against occupation. And I challenge every person who just went through this presentation. If you lived through the conditions of the Palestinian people, if you lived under a military occupation, if your kids were killed in front of you, do you not feel like you have a right to defend yourself, a right to fight back, a right to protect your homeland and to protect your people? So that's generally, Palestinians support resistance. They support military resistance, armed resistance struggle. You'll be hard pressed. Now, Hamas specifically, I mean, Palestinians, Hamas is by the way, Hamas, just to give context, Hamas is a political organization and they have a military wing, which is Al-Qassam.
Say that word again. They have a military that is called what?
Their military wing is Al-Qassam.
Okay.
Al-Qassam. So Hamas is the political entity. And you know, there's a really great talk I just attended that talked about the reason Hamas was Hamas is designated as a terror organization in the US, right? So which is an intentional, I mean, they have the reasons, but it makes it so hard to talk. Like, I mean, I'm a Palestinian Muslim, person right now. It's very hard for me to talk about Hamas because Hamas is a designated terror organization, and I have to be, but the reason they designated Hamas which is a political organization, not the military wing. I mean, military has been designated as a terror organization, but they also designated Hamas as a terrorist entity because it's a way to cripple Palestinians' ambitions for because they say we don't negotiate with terrorists. So now they can't, the US says we don't negotiate with terrorists. So they won't even sit with Hamas to try to negotiate a solution. They make it harder for people to be able to talk about Hamas. So, and within Palestinian society, there's different factions, right? There's Palestine Islamic Jihad, there's the PFLP, which is the more secular part. and so Palestinians, just like here in the US, Palestinians have different affiliations with various political organizations. And so some people may support Hamas, they might support another organization. But I think again, language is important. And when people frame Israel Hamas, or they ask Palestinians to denounce Hamas or condemn Hamas, what they're actually asking, they're not asking about Hamas specifically. And again, I'm not going to talk about Hamas because, but what they're asking when they ask someone, do you condemn Hamas? That is actually a question of, do you give up or do you condemn the Palestinian right to resist, right? The language and the framing in the US, especially the Western world, is that Hamas, it's used as a word to represent all of Palestinian resistance, all of Palestinian, efforts to liberate themselves. So I hope that makes sense. I don't know, I think, like the conclusion is again, Palestinians believe in their right to resist, and they may have different political affiliations, whether it's Hamas or otherwise. And I think well-intentioned people will say, not all Palestinians support Hamas, but when you say that, again, because of the framing, because this has been framed as an Israel versus Hamas war, when you're saying things like that, again, from the perspective of you're saying that, Palestinians don't have a right to defend themselves. Palestinians don't support resistance, or Palestinians don't support, fighting back against the occupation. And again, you'd be hard pressed to find a Palestinian that will tell you, no, I don't think we should fight back against Israeli occupation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the pieces in that last video that is the most poignant to me is, I will throw my marker.
Yeah.
We all know the rocks are typically the most potent of the weapons that Palestinians have. And this is, I think, what makes the Hamas attack so visceral, is it, and I've read this, the Israelis have been lulled into thinking that nothing more than that will happen. Well, clearly it did. So that does conclude our questions. Again, I want to reiterate, there are several comments of great thanks for your presentation. It is absolutely thorough and excellent. And we will be posting the recording on the MEPN website and on YouTube. And you said that you would send it out?
Yeah, I'm happy to share the presentation, and it has links to the videos. And so you all are free to, watch it and share it. And if you can feel free to share my contact information as well, my email. And, if you ever have any follow-up questions or you want to organize a talk, please, I'd be happy to support with that. And again, thank you. Thank you all for just being here and listening.
And this is the strange, Zoom is new. They've done something different. So I was trying to post a bunch of links, and now I can't even figure out how to do that. So we'll let that go. One of the links was American, let's see, Council on American Islamic Relations. And that's an easy one, folks. It's just CAIR.com. I was going to post how to donate, and I can't find it. But anyway, I'll talk through that. Thank you so much, Mariam. This has been an amazing presentation. It obviously makes it very clear that we need to continue to learn, and to spread the word, and to voice our opinions through voting and other ways. So we thank you.
For sure.
A reminder to complete. I usually have a short evaluation, and I don't have that evaluation. So I think I have the evaluation. I think it was darned excellent. So thank you. We're very pleased to announce that next month, Alice Rothschild will be our January 13th, 2024 forum speaker. Mariam, you probably know who Alice is. She's a physician, author, Israel-Palestine peace activist, and filmmaker who traveled to Gaza this past summer as a physician, mostly. Alice will speak on the past and current health crises in Gaza. Watch your email for the formal announcement and how to register. I also wish to inform our audience that longtime and present board member, he was presently on the board, Dennis Dillon, passed away last week. His memorial service will take place later in January, and we will keep you updated on the date and place and time. I believe it's January 20th. Our thoughts and prayers go out to Dennis's family. Also, Middle East Peace Now, and this is no surprise, We are desperately searching for a tech person who can take over what I've had to do triple duty during this presentation and also the mailing out of the forum announcements and so on. If you or anyone you know might be willing to volunteer for this position, please reach out to MEPN@mepn.org and we'll send you an outline of the duties and responsibilities. And finally, if you're new to MEPN forums and like what you see and hear, please consider becoming a member through a donation of any amount. A link would have been posted to give, but just go to mepn.org and you'll see where you can donate, or you can donate via givemn.org. On behalf of the board, we thank you all for your support and we look forward to seeing you at future forums. Mariam, you are welcome to come back anytime. I know you have much more to say. I wish you all a happy holiday, no matter how you celebrate, and peace. May peace be the Webster Word of the Year for 2024. Thank you, everyone.
Amen. Thank you.